want to go ahead and open your Bibles, we'll be in 1 Samuel 1. We got through the first couple of verses or so, and we'll just recap that first half, and then dive into the rest of the story of Hannah, talk about her song here in chapter 2, and then depending on time, we'll get into chapter 3 as well. If not, we'll kind of finish that up on Wednesday. What tribe is Samuel from? Did we establish? Levi. Yeah. So this is one of those. That first verse is one of those kind of tricky passages that might throw some people if we don't dive into it a little bit, because some of those, that highlighted word, some of those are going to read as Ephraim, which you can see that's a pretty close word, even in English. We can see how close that is, but it's probably more accurate to say he's an Epaphraite, which is more of a locational, maybe tribal term, and not necessarily the big tribal term like Levite or Ephraim. Obviously, he's from the country of Ephraim, so that's probably where we get that confusion. But that's where it's important to dive into some of those other genealogies that we find from time to time throughout the Bible, and kind of give some clarity on that. So that makes more sense that he's from the tribe of Levi. It makes sense why the family travels to Shiloh year after year. It would be required for Elkanah to go and serve his time in the tabernacle, and it makes sense why Samuel is able to serve even as a young boy here, because he is a Levite. If he was of the tribe of Ephraim, this wouldn't really make sense that he can serve and offer sacrifices and do all those things. Later on, what does he do? He gets on to Saul for offering sacrifices when it was up to Samuel or the Levites to do that. So why would he? What right would he have if he was not of the tribe of Levi? And then we're introduced to the two wives of Elkanah. Hannah's mentioned first. That's why we kind of surmise that she was the first wife, and it makes sense why he took a second, because she was barren, and it seemed like a fairly important family. Of course, lineage and making sure you have children is pretty important in this society. So if Hannah couldn't do it, well, that's necessitated the reason to take another wife. Of course, that was very, very common back then to have multiple wives and a lot more children in that way for other reasons. But Hannah was childless, and you get the sense that this is a pretty pious religious family, that they go up, they sacrifice. Of course, Hannah's character is pretty top-notch, and even Elkanah seems to be a pretty good guy, at least in the context. Remember, this is the days of the judges, and religion and righteousness is pretty low in this time. We'll see some evidences of that here. Of course, we're introduced to the two sons of Eli as well, Hophni and Phinehas, were the Lord's priests, and we'll see some information about them here in a minute. There's our map where that big name that's kind of smack in the middle, that's where they're from. And if you just head straight to the right, there you got Shiloh, and we're all just in that central part of Israel, central Ephraim. This is dead center. This is the Nashville of Israel right now, the kind of the center of the state right there. Jerusalem at this point is still under the control of the Jebusites, if I remember that right. So it's not going to be until David that it even is in the full control of the Israelites. Mm-hmm. And where was Korah? Which Korah are you talking about? What is he famous for? So actually, I think down the road, I've got to jump ahead here since we're talking about it. I found you a little genealogy list for Eli and his family somewhere around here. There we go. So this was, I mean, I know this can get a little droll sometimes, but it really is important to the Israelites. It's important to the people that wrote these books. So the reason that's why all these names are constantly coming up. So it's good to have a little family tree there. Of course, Levi, they were all Levites that we're talking about here, and the Levites were divided into three families: Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. These were the kind of the three divisions of the Levites, and each one had their own separate duties in regards to worship and the tabernacle. And then it's through the Coethites that we have Moses and Aaron. So the high priest would have been from the Coeth clan, the Coethites. So we see from First Chronicles that Samuel is a Coethite, not a direct descendant of Aaron necessarily, but a descendant of the same tribe or the same, third of the tribe of Levi. We tend to think that actually Samuel is descended from, I think, Korah, you mentioned, and Korah is famous for being swallowed up by the earth. If you remember, he rebelled, and Moses told him to get away. He was trying to say that all the Levites should have been set apart, not just the family of Aaron. He was trying to make sure he was up there as well. And actually, I didn't know this. There's a verse in Numbers, because if you remember reading from the Psalms, we always hear Psalms written by the sons of Korah. So that got me thinking, and I realized, I was thinking that it was Korah and his entire family was pretty much swallowed up, but it specifically says that his sons were not swallowed up in the book of Numbers. They survived. And it's from his sons that we have Samuel, and then, of course, we have the sons of Korah that were writers of many of the Psalms as well. So that's kind of his family lineage. And we'll see that Eli, if you remember, Aaron had 4 sons. The first 2 were killed pretty early on, Nadab and Abihu. You remember that story. So then you have the next 2 sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. So there's only 2 divisions of the Aaronites at this point. Okay, is that how close it was, at least in the genealogy? So that seems pretty close, though. I would think that's skipping a few generations. He's probably 4th from Samuel in the genealogy listed, but that doesn't necessarily mean there weren't more in between. Yeah. Well, and there were several Elkanahs in that list too. So make sure is the one next to Samuel. But either way, he's descended from Korah, and this is going to play into later in the chapter with Eli and his family. But he's from kind of one division of the Aaronites, the Ithamar side, and then Eleazar was actually the older son, and you remember his son Phinehas was the one that was commended for his zeal when he threw the spear at the man that was sinning with the Moabite woman. So it was promised to Phinehas that it was through him that he would have kind of that high priesthood. Well, somewhere along the line, Eli's family took that over. And then we'll see, because of the curse against Eli, it goes back to the family of Eleazar and Phinehas. Maybe you've heard of Zadok. That'll come into play toward really the beginning of 1 Kings with the reign of Solomon. So it's going to switch back. So you got these 2 big families that are kind of fighting back and forth over the priesthood. And Samuel's involved in there, but he's not one of these main descendants from Aaron. He's a son of Korah, which they were cousins, but not necessarily of the same line. 7th? Okay. Yeah. Well, just the time frame, I know. From the wilderness to Samuel, we're probably talking about several hundred years. So, all right, there we go. All right, so back to 1 Samuel. And we have Hannah and we have Elkanah. They offered a sacrifice. He gives this portion, this double portion to Hannah because he loved her. Even though the Lord, this is kind of an interesting phrase in verse 5. The Lord had had kept her from conceiving. Why would the Lord do that? That's one of those. Like, you know me, I'm not going to ask you easy, one word questions, yes or no. That's a pretty deep question. We don't know. The best we can see is that God had a bigger plan, and that's kind of the theme throughout this book and of Samuel. God has a plan. God's providence will win out. His sovereignty will win out. So for whatever reason, she had not conceived to this point. Um, I don't know if this was a test for Hannah or just wasn't even related to Hannah necessarily, but that's the situation. Of course, her rival, the other wife of Elkanah, was a rival to her. She taunted her for not conceiving. So year after year, when she went up to the Lord's house, her rival taunted her in this way. Hannah would weep and would not eat. And we have this fun statement by Elkanah, why are you crying? Aren't I good enough for you? Uh, you know, thanks for that. That was helpful. Oh yeah, this is definitely we've heard this same story multiple times. I mean, uh, John the Baptist was born to parents that were well past the age of conceiving, and they were barren and weren't going to have kids at this point, and then suddenly they did. Sarah and Abram, another example. Um, Even later on, like was it Rebecca and Isaac? Isaac prayed that Rebecca would have children because she was barren, and then she was able to have Esau and Jacob. So this barrenness, and then the Lord providing a child in that way is a very common theme. I guess Lord providing, period, is a common theme throughout the entire Bible. Verse 9, on one occasion, Hannah got up after they ate and drank. This whole travel and this whole event that's happening at the tabernacle, this was not a go to the tabernacle and offer like sin sacrifices or things like that. This wasn't a somber occasion. These sacrifices were typically, or at least the ones mentioned here, were the peace offerings and different kinds of sacrifices than we think. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion. They ate, they drank, but Hannah, how can she be joyful when she is suffering? It describes later on. She says, what's up? I mean, verse 10, deeply hurt, Hannah prayed to the Lord, wept with many tears. She makes this vow, Lord of armies, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut. What did we say that's a reference to? His hair not being cut? The Nazarite vow, exactly. Um, it's kind of interesting, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. As a Levite, that tribe specifically was set apart. That tribe was given to the Lord. They didn't have an inheritance in the land because they were the tribe set apart for the Lord. And it was typical for the males, starting about the age of 30, to serve for a time in the tabernacle, and they would have, I guess, rotations, but that was the age that they would begin to serve. And if I remember right, it's like for 20 years they serve. So they were already set apart as Levites. And then, if you remember as well, the firstborn that opened the womb was set apart to God. So Samuel was already set apart in a special way, but notice this, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. So she is still going above and beyond this setting apart that was already going to occur just from being a Levite and being the firstborn. He will serve all the days of his life. And then the whole reference to Nazarite is interesting too, because more often than not, it seems like that was maybe a short time period that they would take this vow. But this is going to be his entire life, that that this vow would be taken, and there was some things that the mom had to do as well. If you remember when Samson's mom was told that he would be a Nazarite, she was told to stay away from wine, not to cut his hair. She had some things to do too. She could not violate that vow. That would make him be violated in that same way. So she had some things to do, at least while she was pregnant, up until the time he was born, that she had to do as part of that vow. Mm-hmm. No, yeah. It says after she had weaned him. Best I could tell, maybe he was 3 years old, possibly as old as 4, when they typically weaned a child in that day and age. So, still very very young to be serving in the temple. This was not or in the tabernacle. This was not a teenager. This was not a 10-year-old or anything. He was when she took him and left him and went back home and only saw him for once a year for the rest of his life. He was probably younger than Annabelle, maybe 3 or 4 years old. So still very young. Well, and that kind of gives an interesting thing. I was reading one commentator. We tend to, I guess we don't expect as much of our children, especially at 3 or 4 years old. Let them be kids. Even up to like 8 or 9. Just let them be kids. Samuel was serving. The wording we'll see here. It says he wore a linen ephod. He ministered to the Lord. These are words that were tied to the minute he was there from age 3 or 4. This is not, 10 years later he started serving when he was old enough. No, he was serving. He was doing things, obviously not anything huge. He's only 4 years old, but he was still ministering in whatever way he could from the moment he was there. And even later on in the chapter, it talks about the boy Samuel, and she made a little robe for him. Well, that doesn't sound like a teenager. So, we tend to think that, let the kids get older. They don't need to get up here till they're 13 or 14 and serve or do anything. No, he's 3 or 4 years old and he's serving in the tabernacle. And from the very beginning he was there. So, that should be our mindset for our children as well. It doesn't matter. As soon as they're old enough to walk, let's get them doing something, whatever they can do, even at that young age. Let's get them working. Let's get them ministering and serving in whatever way they can. While she continued praying, so she's left this joyous party because she's sad, she's depressed, she's anguished. She just wants to leave and pray. She goes, and Eli was there watching her, and Hannah was praying silently, and though her lips were moving, her voice could not be heard. And of course, Eli thinks she's drunk, and we kind of laugh at this and think, oh, what a silly misunderstanding. But think about this. I've never seen someone drunk and misunderstood them for praying. They probably prayed differently back then. Hands up in the air, bowed down in some way. Her lips were moving, eyes closed. Maybe she looked different than the way we pray today. But I have a hard time imagining that looks really similar to someone staggering around that's drunk and, boisterous. So to me, that tells me that, and of course, think of the setting here. She's at the tabernacle. To me, that tells me this isn't the first time someone's been drunk at the door of the tabernacle. And I think this kind of shows the situation, the spiritual situation of Israel at this time, that it wasn't common for people to come in inebriated states to the tabernacle. And, we think this is just a silly misunderstanding of Eli. Well, he's the high priest. He's basically the leader of religion in Israel. So, and he's allowed a situation where drunk people are allowed at the tabernacle, and it's not uncommon. So I think this is probably another knock and negative against Eli more than just a silly misunderstanding. Hannah corrects him. No, my Lord, Hannah replied, I'm a woman with a broken heart. I haven't had any wine or beer. I've been pouring out my heart before the Lord. Don't think of me as a wicked woman. I've been praying from the depth of my anguish and resentment. And I love this. What is Hannah full of right now? She couldn't eat food. Wasn't hungry. She left the feast because she was so full of what? Sorrow, anguish, resentment. All these things. She's depressed. She's sad. She's misunderstood by her husband. She's misunderstood by Eli. She's accused of being a drunk woman. Hannah is full of all of these terrible negative things. And I love this statement right here because whenever we're full of these things, what do we need to do when we are full of anguish and sorrow and resentment and whatever it is? What does it say? What does she say she's doing? More specifically, look at right at the end of verse 15. I've been pouring out my heart. Those things can fill up our souls, can fill up our hearts. We need to pour that out, empty that out of our bodies. And the way we do that is through prayer. Probably, we tend to set aside prayer sometimes for, thank you, God, for this and that, and, when we're happy. But, these are probably the most powerful times when we pray is when we are truly pouring out our heart before the Lord and pouring out all those worries, all the cares of this world, and pouring that out to Him, and just letting Him take care of that. And of course, Eli responds, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you've made of Him." "May your servant find favor with you," she replied. And then notice what happens. And Hannah went on her way. She's poured out her heart, so her heart is empty of all that sorrow and worry and all those things again. And what did she do? She ate, and she no longer looked despondent. She was able to fill herself up with good things. And notice this is immediate. Is she pregnant yet? Has the Lord, really answered her prayer at this point? No. But to her, He has, because He's listened. She's maybe she kind of equates Eli's response with the response of God, that blessing. But her character has changed because, her countenance has changed because she has poured that out to God. It's in His hands now. Let God grant the request that you've made to Him. That's exactly what she's been promised, and that's exactly what she expects. That He will take care of her. He's going to take care of it one way or the other. I don't know that she knows for sure that, I'm definitely going to have a child now, but she knew that God had heard her. She knew that she'd poured that out to Him, and He was going to answer in whatever way seemed fit to Him, and that was okay to her. So she was able to completely change just in that moment.
It's just a strong reminder that when we take things to God, we need to leave them.
Exactly. Yeah, she could have just kept crying and worrying and been a hot mess for the rest of her life. And, that's not really pouring our souls out to God and putting our trust and our hope in Him. But Hannah, a great example of doing exactly that. Then, of course, we know the rest of the story. The next morning, Hannah got up early to worship before the Lord. She was able to worship. The very next morning, she was able to, be more of a part of the whole feast and everything that was going on. And then they returned home. Elkanah was intimate with his wife, and had the Lord forgotten about her? It says the Lord remembered her. Had He really forgotten about her? No. Think about the language that's used with the children of Israel when they were 400 years in Egypt. The Lord hadn't forgotten one moment. That's just one of those words we use to say this is the time when the Lord actually acted in remembrance of her. It's not like he had forgotten and then, I forgot she was on my list to take care of. No, it's just he finally uh, took action in this instance. And after some time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel because she said, I requested or I asked him from the Lord. And when Elkanah and all his household went up to make the annual sacrifice, his vow offering to the Lord, Hannah did not go this time and explained to her husband, after the child is weaned, I'll take him to appear in the Lord's presence and to stay there permanently. And Elkanah agrees to that. Do what you think is best. Stay here until you've weaned him. May the Lord confirm your word. So Hannah stayed there and nursed her son until she weaned him. When she had weaned him, she took him with her to Shiloh, as well as a 3-year-old bull, half a bushel of flour, a clay jar of wine. The boy was still young. She took him to the Lord's house at Shiloh. They slaughtered the bull, brought the boy to Eli. And please, my Lord, she said, as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this boy, and since the Lord gave me what I asked him for, I now give the boy to the Lord, for as long as I live, he is given to the Lord. Then he worshiped the Lord there, yes.
This also shows the righteousness of Elkanah, that, when a woman makes a vow, when the husband hears of it, he can either nullify the vow or keep it. And so when he hears of it, he confirms her vow, and he's willing to go along with it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He could have avoided it because this is the firstborn son of his probably first and favorite wife. So it would naturally seem that if Samuel would be the one to pass down the family name and keep all the family lands and everything would pass through Samuel, but he's going along with this. He's losing his son as well for service to the Lord. So and he agrees to that, and he's fine with that, even though he could have avoided that as well. So now, verse 28, I give the boy to the Lord, for as long as I live, he is given to the Lord, and he worshiped there. And that gets us to Hannah's song here in chapter 2. It's interesting, they say he's 3 years old. So she brings her son Samuel, a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, whatever he is, and she's planning on leaving him there forever. She's going to come and visit maybe once a year, but that's it. This isn't like a boarding school or some, you take him off to school and you pick him up later in the afternoon. She's only going to see him once a year, and he's still such a young man, not even barely a boy yet, probably still almost an infant. And yet, when she does that and she's getting ready to leave, this is what she does. She has a song of rejoicing. Look at that first verse. My heart rejoices in the Lord. What is her heart probably full of at this time, leaving her son there? She's full of probably sadness and worry again, but remember, she has been filling up, she's pouring all that out to God, and she's filling her heart up with joy. My horn, my strength, horn is usually associated with strength. So my horn is lifted up by the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. She's, I have no doubt she's still worried, and she loves Samuel. That's her son that she's prayed for, and she cares about him. So there's going to be sadness there, but she is allowing herself to be filled up with these bigger picture things in this song. And we tend to think, she just kind of, the Spirit came over her, and all of a sudden she just started singing the song. Well, she was writing this. That's not how the Holy Spirit works. She probably was sitting and writing this psalm maybe since the day he was born, and writing these words out. And then it was probably first presented at the tabernacle when she brought Samuel there and worshiped. So, she presented this song to the singers or whatever they had. She sang it herself in front of the other people. But can you imagine, a more beautiful or better song to sing at the tabernacle that day than this one? Verse 2, there is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you. There is no rock like our God. But not boast so proud. Do not boast so proudly or let arrogant words come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge. Actions are weighed by him. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving hunger no more. You start to see some kind of parallel. This is how Hebrew poetry works, these kind of parallel thoughts. The woman who is childless gives birth to 7, a perfect number, and the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some down to Sheol, and he raises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. Some of these words and phrases that I've highlighted, we're going to see these types of things play out throughout this book. The Lord brings death and gives life. What has he done so far? He's given life. He's brought life to Hannah, who was despondent and in anguish. He's brought life in the form of Samuel and brought life to Samuel as well. And then in just a couple chapters, we're going to see the Lord bringing death upon the sons of Eli because of their wickedness. And we'll see that as well, death coming to Saul because of his wickedness, and life being brought up to the nation of Israel through the rulership and the leadership of David. He humbles those that are of high station. He humbles the giant Goliath, one of the biggest men you'll ever see, who is humbled and killed by this ruddy-looking boy, who's maybe a teenager still, who God then exalts to the leader and ruler of his nation, and even promises this boy David an everlasting covenant all the way to his son Jesus. So we see this. We see just this is more than just a psalm of rejoicing. It is a psalm of prophecy and looking forward to the promises of God. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the trash heap. He seats them with noblemen, gives them a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world on them. That is one of our themes, really, throughout this book. And everything that the earth is set on is the Lord. The Lord is in control of this whole narrative, this whole story, from the time of Hannah and giving birth to Samuel, all the way to the end of this book with kind of the last days of King David and passing on that rulership to his son Solomon. He guards the steps of his faithful ones. The wicked perish in darkness, for a person does not prevail by his own strength. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder in the heavens against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king. He will lift up the horn of his anointed. I highlighted thunder. Baal is going to come up several times and has come up a lot in the history of Israel as an alternate god to worship. And he was typically a god associated with storms and thunder. Well, who is the one that is thundering from the heavens? It's God. It is not Baal or any other false god. It is God himself. And we mentioned that horn again. It kind of started off the psalm, or started off this prayer, and now we're kind of toward the end. He will give power to his king. He will lift up the horn or the strength of his anointed. Is there a king in Israel at this time? What is the only mention of king up to this point? You remember Moses mentioned that when you have a king, he has a list of some things that king has to do. He needs to rule righteously. He needs to write down the words of this law. He should not accumulate many wives or many horses or much wealth, but should trust in God. That's the only mention of a king up to this point. It's been Moses and Joshua, and then a series of judges and priests up to this point that have ruled or led Israel. There's not even a thought of a king even at this time. Samuel's still a young man. It'll be when he's an old man that they actually ask for a king a couple of chapters later. So we're still 50 years away from the first king, and yet here's Hannah understanding, knowing enough about God's promises and the law of Moses to expect that will happen. And this is a really powerful word here. That word anointed. Anyone have anything else there? Or if you're one of those that have the Strong's word there, that word is, let me say it correctly here. So that one is, nope, I'm not on my Strong's there. Mashiach, yeah. What does that sound like? Messiah. So the first, whenever you see anointed, or I guess I think it's the same word. Well, I won't guess then, but yeah, that word is the same word that we have Messiah. Or if you read it in New Testament Greek, that word is Christ. So here is Hannah, you know, just a regular old woman. I mean, she's really nothing special, but she's the first mention of the Christ, of lifting up the horn of the Messiah here. So we have that first mention of the Messiah and Christ here with Hannah in Samuel chapter 2. So she's looking big picture right now. She's looking ahead to a king, and even farther to God's king, to his son. Any thoughts or questions about those first two chapters? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, how long has it been since there's been any kind of reference to the anointed at one time, the Messiah?
Well, this is the first one in the Bible, so we don't see that word that I can tell any time before this. And then David's going to pick up on that, using that same term a lot with his Psalms. You know, the Anointed One, and of course that theme. You know, he's got a lot. There's a lot of Psalms that have to, that are pointing us toward Christ. So he will definitely pick up on that more. But yeah, up to this point, I mean, king's only been mentioned once with Moses, and then anointed or Messiah. That word hasn't even been used. So we're just starting to get a picture of what's going on.
Up until this point, the anointed priest.
Yeah.
Now, you do have Abimelech, who is the king in Judges.
We don't count him.
We don't count him.
Although we list him in the song when we sing the Judges song, so I guess he's listed in the book, but
He was the failed king.
yeah. So yeah, you mentioned the son of Gideon. Abimelech kind of makes himself a king in a sense. In the Judges, there were some crossovers with, maybe they weren't a king in name, but they were a king in action and how they ruled and how they judged. But a true God-appointed king has not even come. And even when they ask for a king, it's different than, give us a king like Abimelech. No, they're not asking for that kind of more localized. They want a national king that can unite the tribes. A little bit different when they ask for Saul later on. So that gets us to the kind of the tail end here of chapter 2. We've been learning about this great family: Elkanah, Hannah, now Samuel, and now we have that contrast here. Eli's sons were wicked men. Dwayne, what's it say in King James?
Which verse?
Verse 12, chapter 2.
Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial.
Sons of Belial. There's you a good King James term. So, sons of Belial, it's usually translated wicked men. It's actually interesting if you go back to when Eli accuses Hannah of being drunk. She says, "No, I'm not a wicked woman. I'm not a daughter of Belial." So now you have this contrast, this woman that is clearly not a daughter of Belial, and now we have these two sons of Eli that are sons of Belial, or wicked men. They did not respect the Lord or the priest's share of the sacrifices from the people. When anyone offered a sacrifice, the priest's servants would come with a 3-pronged meat fork while the meat was boiling, plunge it into the container, kettle, cauldron, or cooking pot. The priest would claim for himself whatever the meat fork brought up. This is the way they treated all the Israelites who came here to Shiloh. This was common. There were certain sacrifices that were not completely burnt up for God, the priests would come and take a portion of that. And but usually what would happen is they would take the secondary portion, not the best of the meat, but a secondary. But what was happening here, verse 18, even before the fat was burned, the priest servants would come and say to the one who was sacrificing, "Give the priest some meat to roast, because he won't accept boiled meat from you, only raw." If that person said to him, "The fat must be burned first, then you can take whatever you want for yourself," the servant would reply, "No, I insist that you hand it over right now. If you don't, I'll take it by force." So what was happening, and of course, it's not Eli's sons doing this. They're commanding the servants to do this sin, but and even the people recognize that this is wrong. The fat was the best part of the meat. That was supposed to be burned up for the Lord, just like we give him the firstborn, the best sheep or whatever. The best should go to the Lord, and the priests would get what was second. Well, the priests were taking the fat first, the best part. We tend to think, oh, the fat's kind of the nastiest part, but after watching Alone, if you've ever seen that show, that's where they go out and they have to just live alone and survive for 3 months or whatever. And some of them they'll actually get like a big game, like a muskox or a moose or something. But they're still starving because some of that even a moose or a muskox, they're so lean, there's not enough fat. That those people with all this meat are still starving because there's not enough fat on this animal for them that they need. So the fat is what's most important. That's what helps you survive. So that was supposed to go to God, and the priests would get what was second. But these priests were taking the best part of the meat first, which obviously is a big no-no. The servant's sin was very severe in the presence of the Lord because the men treated the Lord's offering with contempt. And even the people, they said, no, it's the people were the ones reprimanding Eli's sons. They said, hey, no, it's the fat should be burned first, but they were still saying, no, give it. I'm going to take it by force. So very, very wicked things happening here. And yet, in the next verse, here we have Samuel. Samuel served in the Lord's presence. This mere boy was dressed in the linen ephod. So you have these, adults, probably well over 30, Hophni and Phinehas, that were doing all these wicked things that should have known better, the sons of Eli. And then you have this just small boy that was showing them how it's supposed to be done. And then you get this picture of Hannah's family and their situation. Each year his mother made him a little robe, took it to him when she went with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. They still, as was their practice, they would go and worship year after year. Eli would offer a blessing to Elkanah. May the Lord give you children by this woman in place of the one she has given to the Lord. Then they would go home. I love the thought of, Hannah giving Samuel to him, but the Lord is not going to be in debt to anyone. So what does he do? He gives Hannah 3 sons and 2 daughters. So if we can say that Hannah gave her son, which obviously her son Samuel and everything is the Lord. So there's nothing that she has that would make the Lord in her debt, but the Lord's is going to bless fivefold to her one that she offered here. So that's the Lord's MO. That's what he does. He blesses 5 and 10 times and 20 times more than we can ever expect. Meanwhile, the boy grew up in the presence of the Lord. So he grew up. He didn't grow up and then Hannah took him. He grew up in the presence of the Lord. Back in verse 18, and he served in the Lord's presence. So what a great way to live! What a great way to serve! And hopefully we can do that for our children as well. We can help them grow in the presence of the Lord and in the service of the Lord as well. All right, we'll pick up there. I think that gets us to the end of chapter 2, and then we'll finish up chapter 3 on Wednesday. Thank you.